Hello again, everybody. This week we are jumping into Aristotle's Metaphysics, and so let's dive right in. So one thing I want you to keep in mind as we're going through the lectures this week, and as you go through reading Aristotle, is that Aristotle thinks everything has a function or purpose, and these objects are built in such a way that they can perform that function. So ask yourself, what is your function? What is the function of a human being? And then ask yourself that about a bunch of other objects, right? What is the function of a dog? What is the function of the planetary movement? So on and so forth, right? What is the function of all of these things? And then ask yourself, how are you built, or how are those other objects built to perform that? So if you can think of what the human function is, then you should be able to explain how we are built to perform that function. So think about that throughout this entire lecture. One other thing that's sort of underlying all of Aristotle's thinking here is the classic problem of all the pre-Socratics dealing with change. As we saw in the pre-Socratics, they were constantly trying to explain how things change. We have Thales and Anaximander saying that they're basic constituents of the universe, and then these transform somehow. For Thales, it was water through differences in motion, and so that could transform into other objects. But then we had Parmenides and Heraclitus, who both made claims that change isn't actually real. Right, there is no change in the universe. It's just an illusion of our experience. So for Parmenides, he claimed there was no change whatsoever. Everything was just sort of this one big eternal thing that does not move or change. Heraclitus went to the sort of opposite end of the spectrum and said everything is in constant flux. That one might sound weird. Why doesn't that mean there's change? Well, there has to be something stable around which everything else is moving for us to see this change, right? So there's got to be something stable as a point of reference for all the other things that we think are changing. So that's something that Aristotle is going to try and account for in his Metaphysics. He's going to give us an account of change, and he's going to give us something that stays stable, and then some things that change around that thing that stays stable. Okay, so let's get into his ontology. What things exist in the universe? And first is a distinction between substances and accidents. So substances, it's easier to think of substances as just objects, right? So the substance or the object is the thing that maintains constancy throughout the change in that thing's properties. So an example probably makes this easier. My dog Odin is an object or a substance. And my dog has changed over time. Right? He's grown from a puppy into like an 85-pound dog. He's had knee surgery. The color of his fur has shifted a little bit over time. There's more brown than there used to be, so on and so forth, right? But Odin is still the same dog. So that's why we call Odin a substance, right? Odin is the object that has persisted through all of those changes in his properties. Accidents are just the properties, right? So when we're thinking about the things that change within an object over time, that's when you're talking about the accidents or properties. So Odin has the properties of blackness and brownness in his fur, unnaturalness in his reconstructed knee. He's really hyper, so he has hyperactiveness in his demeanor. And these things have changed over time, right? His fur has shifted in color. There's more brown there. His knee was originally natural. Now it's not. And his hyperactive demeanor will definitely decrease as he gets older, right? That's just sort of the natural thing that happens. So all of these things will change over time. All of these accidents or properties that Odin has will change over time, but Odin remains the same. So the properties are the accidents. Odin, or the object, is the substance. And so we already see how, right, built into the beginning of Aristotle's Metaphysics, he's trying to account for change, right? The substance is the thing that stays the same, or the thing that is stable. And the accidents are the things that change in relation to the thing that stays stable. All right, what else is there in his ontology? Well, there's also a second distinction between the universal and the particular. For those of you familiar with philosophy, this is probably a common distinction. You probably have a pretty good grasp on it, but for those of you who don't, roughly, the idea of a universal is something that can be predicated of multiple objects. Or you can think of it as a property that many things share in. So brownness, right? We're not talking about the particular brown of your desk. We're talking about the universal property of brownness. And multiple things share in that. My dog Odin, the desk I'm at, some crayons do, trees do, etc., right? All of these different objects have or share in this universal property of brownness. Now, just so you can sort of see where this is coming from, for Plato, the forms were these universals, right? Because the forms had the essence or property that all of the particular objects in the real world participated in or shared in or were caused by, however you want to say that. Right? So as a particular example, all just things, right? So all the just acts you see out in the world, each of those acts shares in the essence or property found in the form of justice. That's just another way of saying the form of justice really is the universal property that all the objects share in. The particular is when we're using a property, it's just picking out a single object or property being referenced. Right, so like I said, all dogs share in the universal of being a dog, right? But Odin is a particular term that denotes a unique dog. So we can talk about Odin's brownness, and there we're talking about particular brownness. We can talk about the desk you're sitting at, the particular brownness of that desk. So even though all of these things share in the universal of brownness, there is a particular brown associated with them. And we can use terms to pick out particular objects in the universe. Right, so we can talk about human beings. That's a universal term. It applies to all of us, everyone listening to this lecture. And we can also pick out particular human beings. So James, I am a particular human being who happens to share in the universal of human being. Okay, so hopefully that's pretty clear. And so now he puts all these things together. He says, look, there are these two distinctions, and that lands us with four different, four different types of things that exist. First, there are universal properties. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Hopefully you have a good idea already. Universal properties would be brownness, sadness, hairiness, whatever else you want to add there, right? They're properties that everything shares in, or what a bunch of objects have in common. Then there are universal substances like dog, chair, human being, right? When we use these words, we're not referring to any unique object, right? Any particular object. We're sort of just referring to the general concept or abstract notion of all these different objects. Particular properties would be Odin's hairiness, my gingerness, a clown's sadness, etc. Right? There are many other gingers in the world, but it's realized in a particular way in me. My gingerness is different from the universal property of gingerness that I share in, right? Because there are a bunch of different gingers that all look slightly different from one another, but we're all sharing in that property of gingerness, but mine is realized in a particular way. So that's a particular property of me. Okay, and then finally is particular substances, and that's all of the objects. That's all of us, right? So Odin is a particular substance. You are a particular substance. Socrates was a particular substance. Each unique object is a particular substance. So why is that? Well, it's because you and I have the ability to remain a constant object that acquires different properties over time. Right? So I am a particular thing, and I'm also a substance because I can have different properties over time as one sort of unified person. Okay. So this is his ontology, right? This is his description of what really exists in the universe. These are the major components that he's going to build everything else from. Right? Now, an important question you should be asking is, are all four of these components on equal footing, right? Do all of them exist fundamentally, or do some of them come from the others, right? Are some generated by the others? In other words, are some more basic? Are some more fundamental than the others? And Aristotle says yes. The particular substances, you, me, Odin, Socrates, these things are the most fundamental. Why is that? Well, because we don't actually ever see or experience any of the universals or particular properties. Those things are dependent on the particular substances for their existence. Right? So when it comes to either of the universals, we don't actually see or experience them. And when it comes to the particular properties, well, those are just dependent on the particular substance. Otherwise, they wouldn't even exist. So the particular substance has to be the most fundamental. Let's break that down a little bit further. All right, so let's go one by one. So particular substance is the most fundamental. That must mean we somehow get the universal substances from the particular substances. And this makes sense because we don't ever actually experience the universal substance, right? You've never seen the abstract notion of brownness that all brown things share in, right? That's just not something you're going to see or experience. You see a bunch of particular browns. So, how do we come to know these universal substances? Well, roughly it's a process of abstraction. And we'll talk about this way more in detail toward the end of the lecture when we talk about the process of induction. But roughly here, it's a process of abstraction. We look at all of these particular substances, these particular dogs out in the world, and then we abstract away and apply our reason, and then we somehow form the universal idea or universal substance of a dog. And we do that with all of those things, right? So just by taking our experiences of a bunch of particular substances of a particular kind, right? We see this human, that human, you, myself, so on and so forth. Then I abstract away from each of those individual humans and come to realize they all share something in common. It's being a human being. And so that's how we get the idea of universal substances. But it takes our experiences of particular substances first before we can even have this idea. That's why particular substances are more fundamental. For particular properties, this one's pretty easy to explain, right? The particular properties wouldn't even exist unless there was a particular substance for them to be realized in. So the particular properties are dependent on the particular substances. And so that's why the substance is more fundamental. Another way of thinking about this is look at the Marvel movies, right? Captain America has changed costumes, facial hair. He's had different demeanors. Sometimes he's more funny. Sometimes he's more serious. So all of these properties have changed over time, but you still have Captain America. Right now, if Thanos snapped away Captain America, well, then suddenly all of those other things would be gone, right? Any type of facial hair, any type of costume or demeanor, all those things are gone the second Captain America is gone. Right, so that's what we mean when we say the particular properties are dependent on the particular substance. Right, all of those particular properties of Captain America rely on Captain America existing as the substance for them to even be there in the first place. Okay, and then finally, universal properties. That one's the same type of reasoning as the universal substances. We go from our particular substance. That gives us the particular properties we have, and then we abstract away from all of those particular properties to realize the universal properties. Okay, and that's the sort of basic components of the ontology, and we'll continue with this in the next lecture. Thanks, everybody.